Welcome again, ladies and gentlemen, to Simple Truths with the Bald Man. I am your host, Pastor Jared. And tonight, I'm going to revisit the science series. I'm going to get into the last subject of the science series. Don't know how long this is going to be, so it may end up being more than one video, but I'm going to get it all out here, and then we're going to move on in the near future to some other things. I've actually started to get a few, one so far, but I am anticipating and expecting more questions and topics to cover, and that's on you guys. Like I said, you want this to be more interesting, you got to give me some information to go with, and somebody has stepped up and a pretty interesting question, so that's going to happen pretty quick. But for now, the last place I'm going to go to in dealing with the science aspect of and just to kind of go back and recap, the whole idea is there are certain sciences that people go to, and I'm not going to say that the science itself in the beginning was intended to try to disprove God or anything. I'm not sure. And that's not really the point. The point is that today, people will point to these things as reasons that God doesn't exist, or reasons that they don't believe in God, or reasons that the story in the Bible doesn't work. And even some Christians will start to liberally interpret the creation story in the Bible to fit into the accepted scientific narrative. And I can't say that I know for certain how it happened, or how the earth was created, or how God did it, or if, the timeline or anything like that. What I can say is that the major sciences that claim to explain the age of the earth and how we got here, and evolution, which is what we're going to cover tonight, and things like that, they've got a lot of holes in them. I see a whole lot of room for them to not be correct, and room for the creation story of Scripture to be accurate. Even the timeline of it being literal days to be accurate. And there's so many holes in the theories that people point to disprove it. I mean, anybody who's going to call themselves a real, true scientist, somebody who's actually looking for an answer, they cannot discount creation in exchange for evolution and things like that, because there's just too many holes in these given theories. So that being said, let's just go ahead and dive right in, because this is one I tend to get lost in. I'm going to do my best to keep myself reined in and to keep it simple. That's the whole point. And to keep it, to not chase too many rabbits. I don't want to complicate this. It is a complicated subject. And so I want to do it as simply as I can, so that you listening and viewing can see the points I'm making, and then be able to clearly say, that sounds good, that doesn't sound good, I like where this guy's going, I don't like it, whatever, and I'm not here to convince you one way or the other either. I am here to simplify the information for you, to tell you what I think about it, and that doesn't mean that's how you have to think about it. That just means I'm going to make it as clear as I can for you, and then tell you what that says to me. You make your own decisions. Comment. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Tell me if you think I missed something. Tell me, whatever. Let's open a dialogue. So in talking about evolution, the first place that I want to start is to explain what evolution is. I'm sure most people understand the idea, but I want to dig a little deeper into what evolution really is, and some finer details that you may or may not have encountered, and then from there move into some of the issues I have. So, evolution really started with a man named Charles Darwin. Most of you have probably heard that name. A lot of people have seen the Jesus fish on the back of cars. Well, there's also a Darwin fish, which is the Jesus fish with feet coming off of it, and it's kind of a little jab at the whole Jesus fish culture by saying evolution is how we got here, not God. But Charles Darwin, where he started with evolution, or at least the first major aspect that's known about him, is Darwin's finches. What happened, and I'm not sure exactly all the steps leading up to this, but what happened is Charles Darwin went and studied finches in the Galapagos Islands, little birds that he studied in the Galapagos Islands, and he realized, he realized by looking at them that they didn't look quite the same as the finches that he was accustomed to in his home of England. So they were the same birds, and he could see they were the same birds, but there were differences to them. Specifically, the finches in the Galapagos Islands had bigger, more robust bill structures. They had harder, bigger bills, and the reason for this, he concluded, was because the food sources that they had to choose from were bigger, harder to crack open and get into nuts and things like that. So over time, they developed a different kind of beak so that they could get to the food sources easier. And so while they were the same bird, the same species of bird that he knew from England, they had some differences based on where they lived and their needs in the area. So the English finch had a smaller, not quite as robust beak because the food source didn't require it, and so they just never adapted it. And then the Galapagos Island finch had the bigger, tougher beak and was able to get to harder to get to foods. This is an example of what is called microevolution. Essentially, one species that lives in two different places has some different aspects of their physicality that adapts them better to their environment as opposed to this group over here. So this group has adaptations that's good for this environment because of all the time that they've spent and the generations and things like that, and their bodies have adapted to the environment. This one has different aspects. Same species. You put them side by side, you can tell that they are related to each other. You can tell they're the same thing, but you can also see that there are differences in the nuances of their physicality. That is microevolution. What I would call adaptation, and I think that would be a perfectly accurate explanation. It's adapting to your surroundings, but science has dubbed it microevolution. Macroevolution is what most people are really arguing for when they argue the evolutionary theory. Macroevolution is one species becomes a different species over time, and that the adaptations lead to a completely different species. This is the whole life spontaneously began as a single-celled organism, and then over time became a multiple-celled organism, and over time crawled out of the water onto the land, and then stood upright and eventually became man. Macroevolution is also we all come from apes, and we are, our closest relative is the chimpanzee, and that's where we came from kind of ideals. That's macroevolution. this species was not good enough, was not perfect enough, was not advanced enough, whatever, and just spontaneously over time became a totally different species. You stand them next to each other, they're not the same thing. It's not a simple change in adaptations and individual characteristics. It is two different beings. So that's macroevolution on a very simple explanation. So here's my deal. And going back to what I was saying, microevolution, like I said, I think is best defined as adaptation. However, if science defines microevolution as adaptation instead of microevolution, then it doesn't have it doesn't have that tie-in. See, microevolution is a thing. It is. We can see it. You can look around, you can see it. It's even been observed as it happens. Look at dog breeds. This is a forced adaptation kind of thing that a lot of human intervention has also caused. But look at different dog breeds. Dog breeds change, and Labradoodles. That's a fairly new family in the species of dog, but it's different. You can stand it next to another dog. They're both dogs, but they're different. So it's kind of like that. There's a difference, but it's not changing the complete makeup of a thing. You can still see the essence of the other things in it. And that would be more adaptation, but they call it microevolution because then when you have macroevolution, you have a theory that cannot be observed, that is not evidenced, and I'll get into some of that later, but you have a theory that really doesn't have any evidence to support it and doesn't have anything to prove it. And I don't like the word proof, but just bear with me. When there's nothing to prove it, if you can take the same root word and apply different precursors to it, then the one that can be observed kind of lends credence and credibility to the one that can't be. So if I can prove this is a thing, and then I can name it basically the same thing as I named this thing that can't be proven, I can use the credibility from this one to boost this one and push it into a more acceptable area. I'm serious. That is, in my opinion, why microevolution is called microevolution instead of adaptation. Simply for no other reason than to help to boost macroevolution into an accepted theory, and to help people to land on it and ignore other possible explanations. So why do I have a problem with macroevolution as a theory? Well, number one, there is no empirical evidence that macroevolution has ever existed. There's no evidence that it is occurring at present, has ever happened in the past. No one throughout history has ever seen it or observed it as it happened. Conveniently, the evolutionary process takes so long that it cannot be observed in process by human eyes, because you're talking about something that takes, years, centuries, millennia, and even millions of years. So it's not possible that we can observe it and see it as it happens, because we don't live long enough to see it, if it were true. So, I had a point, and I don't think I'm going to get back to it. So, whatever. Like I said, conveniently, it takes too long for us to actually see it happen. So we have to just assume that it must be true. That's basically what we're left with. Number two, there are no transitional fossils. If evolution had taken place, there should be transitional structures preserved in the fossil record. Essentially, if an invertebrate, an organism without a backbone, is said to have become a vertebrate, an organism with a backbone, then somewhere in the fossil record there should be creatures that progress toward that. There should be creatures that show this non-backbone thing, then this something that is forming a backbone, something that looks like it may be, it is this thing, but it's different, and then something that's got a little more of a backbone, and then eventually this vertebrate. There are no transitionals. There's no fossil records that support that have been found anywhere. Really simply, the fossil record as we know it does not support and has not ever shown one species becoming another. Now, I actually had somebody argue with me one time, well, we've only found 1% of the fossil record. And that sounds, on the surface, that actually sounds like a halfway intelligent argument. Here's the problem with that, and anybody who understands math has already gotten there. If you take an unknown quantity and you say there's this unknown quantity of fossils. We don't know how many fossils are out there because we haven't found them all yet. We know there's more. We know there's more because there's earth we have not dug up, places we haven't explored. We know that there is more fossils out there than we've found. We don't know how many. We do know we found this many. And so we know that there's this much, and we know there's more than this much, but we don't know how much there is. Then you cannot possibly quantify what percentage of fossils you have found based on an unknown amount that still exists. Now, you could say, we know we haven't found 100% of them because we know there's more out there. Or you can't really even say that because you don't know that there's different fossils out there. You just know there's more space to explore. So you could say we have a fairly educated guess that we have not found 100% of the fossil record. But you cannot possibly say we have only found less than 1% of the fossil record. It's just, you can't possibly quantify that. You don't know that. We could have found 100% of the fossil record at this point in time, and as we go and we explore and we dig more, we just realize over time that, hey, we already are there. I don't think we are. I think there's plenty of fossils and creatures and types of things that haven't been found. But my point is, you just cannot use an argument like that, well, we've only found 1%, so you can't discount this based on that. Regardless of all the archaeological digs, of all of the searching that we've done as a human race, and especially in the last several hundred of years when this has really taken an upturn and we've really started looking into our history, in all that time, not once has transitional fossils been found. We just have not seen the fossil records show this thing became that thing, and these are the steps and that it got there. It just doesn't work. Number 3, there is no evidence of evolution on a molecular level. There is no DNA evidence that shows a progression of one species becoming another. Therefore, anybody who has any kind of an idea about the progression from this species to that species, all of that comes straight out of the imagination. There is no other way to draw that conclusion other than, I assume, if that became this, then these must be the things, the steps and how they look to get there. It's all creativity. It's all imagination. It's all, even somebody who is trying to do it right, it's all best guess. That's it. There is no DNA evidence to support it. One of the favorite arguments that I'm hit with all the time is that humans and chimpanzees share 98% of their DNA. We had to have come from apes because we share so much DNA with apes. Now, 98%, that sounds like a lot. That sounds like an insurmountable amount. Only 2% of our DNA is different than chimpanzees. We must have come from a common ancestor. But back up for a second. There are millions and millions of lines of code in your DNA. Now, in millions of lines, 2% really is a big number. That's a giant number. So the differences and the amount of differences that can be are suddenly a lot bigger than what 2% sounds like on the surface. It's all about how you dig, or how much you're willing to dig. And the other thing is, no one mentions that, people want to get on that 98% of our DNA we share with chimpanzees. Nobody ever mentions that we share 90+% of our DNA with cats and dogs and mice and cattle and elephants, but nobody's trying to claim that we come from cats and dogs and mice and elephants and cattle. Nobody's trying to say your mama was a cow. It's just they get keyed in on one thing. And why? Because we look most like apes. And that's it. Creativity says that if we really came from animals, then the most likely place we came from was apes. And so we have to determine that apes is where our ancestry is. But that's all based on if we actually came from animals. And there's no evidence to really support that. DNA does not support it in as much as people want to point out that it does, or claim that it does. Number 4, and I'm trying to rush through these. I'm trying not to get bogged down. And if this isn't clear, man, hit me up with your questions and tell me what I didn't cover, or what I confused, or what I glazed over too fast, and let me fix it. But number 4, geological time scale. The question to that. Evolution theory depends upon a great age of rocks calculated by the geological timescale. Now, I referenced this in my last video. If you take a cross section of the Earth, you will see rock layers that are considered by science to be the eras of the Earth, and that's where the fossil record comes from. And they're millions of years. Each layer takes millions of years to deposit and compress and become its particular rock layer, and then the next rock layer starts on top of that, and they're all very defined and very hard line kind of changes in the rock layer and the fossils that are in that rock layer, and they take millions of years to form. This scale was based upon principles of geology recently invalidated by laboratory experiments. Now, when I say recently, in scientific and in historic terms, in geological terms, we're talking, the French Academy of Science in 1986 and 1988, the Geological Society in 1993, and then in May through June of 2000. Now, these are all dates and examples of experiments that have been done that invalidated it. What these things did basically is showed that the layers of rock, the rock deposits that are considered to be millions of years each, that show the fossil record and all the different eras of the Earth, the Mesozoic and Jurassic and all that stuff, they all could have and likely were deposited in a matter of days and weeks, not millions of years. If that's the case, that screws up the whole story. I mean, every bit of the story gets screwed up. And once again, a global flood could easily explain the way that the rocks are layered now. If everything is stirred up in water and in this turbulent flood and all turned over and kicked up and all that stuff and then left to settle, the rock layers could very easily be explained right there in a matter of days, weeks, and months. Also, if the rock layers took millions of years to form, so there's a rock layer that's this big, okay? It took millions of years to deposit the rock from here to here. And in the middle of this rock layer, you've got a fossil sitting right there that's completely covered top and bottom in rock. And then it's fossilized, which fossilized means that all of the soft material and the organic material in that organism are slowly replaced with hard mineral from the rocks. So basically they're pulling in minerals from the rocks and replacing the soft and generally moist materials, all the water that a body is made up of and all that stuff. All that is changed out. It's like a petrified tree. They're exchanging their organics for minerals, for inorganics, and they're becoming part of the rock, but they maintain the shape of the organism. But here's the problem. If this takes millions of years to deposit, and right around this area, this thing dies and is laying on top of the ground for the millions of years it takes for the dirt to come the rest of the way up over it, why is it not decayed? Why do those organisms not decay and there's no trace of them left behind? And instead, what you've got is they're encased in rock and fossilized. Honestly, the only way that works is if that rock settled in on top of them all in a very fast, in a very quick succession, so that the air and the atmosphere around cannot get to the fossil or cannot get to the organism to decay it. If it was left to the open air as the rock layer was forming, there would be no record of the fossil. It'd be gone. Now, the very thin things like some plants and ferns and things like that, maybe. Dinosaur footprints, maybe, because those are thin layers in the rock which could have gotten covered over. But entire organisms, they would have to be buried at one time. They'd have to be buried rapidly in order to be protected from the environment so that they could fossilize rather than decay. Okay, I'm saying the same thing over and over. I just want to make sure that you're getting what I'm saying. The millions of years for the rock layers just doesn't work. It doesn't work if you're going to if you're finding fossils in it. Number 5. This is my last point. Evolution ignores laws of physics. Now, there are certain laws of physics that are just non-negotiables, that science just does not, they cannot change. They cannot be different. They cannot not apply to anything. The supposed evolutionary process breaks the most universal and best proved law of physics, the law of increasing entropy. Entropy means lack of order or predictability, gradual decline into disorder. And this is known as the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this law applies not only to physical and chemical systems, but also in biological and geological systems. In fact, all systems, without exception, the law stipulates that all systems tend to lose order. They go towards disorganization and loss of complexity. Essentially, to say it in the simplest terms that I can, systems do not begin in chaos and fall into order. This has been referenced many times by somebody pointing at a computer and saying, pointing at this tablet and saying, if I take all the components of this tablet, put them into a box and shake them enough, then eventually I will pull a perfectly formed and working tablet out of that box. Nobody would expect that. Nobody would think that. But the complexity that is us happened in essentially that exact way. Over millions of years, our components were just shaken together repeatedly over and over and over until this ridiculously complex thing occurred and happened coming from the most simple living organism, which itself came from nothing in the beginning. And science itself, in every other system, in every other instance, science says that cannot happen. The only place, the only time that science says chaos becomes complexity and becomes order is when it comes to evolution. That is the only place where science will allow it to happen, will concede that it's possible. And not because it is actually possible, but because that's the only way to explain it. So, again, simply, ordered systems over time fall away from order and toward chaos. In every aspect of the planet, in every aspect of existence, a system degrades over time. It doesn't go the other way around. The only time you see things go from chaos to order is by specific design. That tablet, you cannot put the components of that tablet in a box and shake it up and get a tablet. But if you put a person who knows how to build that tablet in a room with all those components, they can assemble it and make a working tablet. But there has to be intelligent design involved. That tablet pales in comparison to the complexity of the human body. You cannot logically conclude that this kind of complexity, that this kind of ordered system, systems on top of systems on top of systems. Do you know how many different systems there are in one body? Do you know how many feet of intestine there are in one body? And it replicates 7 billion plus times right now on the planet. Order, predictability, and replication exponentially. Science just does not accept that that's possible without intelligent design. And yet, evolution defies that very principle. It's just not, I just don't see it as a logical explanation. It's just not possible. The very scientists who tell you that it's real are the ones who found and understand these laws that make it impossible to happen. The only way that we exist is by design. And we have not figured out how to design ourselves. So it had to be something bigger and smarter than us. So that's it. That's where I'm going. It's a little long, but it's not long enough for 2 videos. So here you go. You're free. I am done boring you with my science content. I really actually hope that you enjoyed it. I love this stuff. I love talking about it. And I love seeing the arguments that come in, because if something comes in that I haven't heard, it gives me a chance to research some more. And I know that's crazy. This idiot likes to research. What kind of weirdo does that? But I do. I like learning. I like finding new things and stuff like that. I'm hoping you do, because that's kind of the point of the videos here. But for the science stuff, I'm done, at least for now, until I find a new subject that I like and want to talk about. So next week, I'm going to move on to our first viewer question and talk about that one, and we'll see where that one goes. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I guess I'll throw you a little bit of a teaser. It very closely deals with the hypocrisy of Christianity. So, maybe that'll interest you and you'll come back and check it out. Until then, I love you guys. If you disagree with me, if I missed something, if you want me to explain something, or if you have your own topics for the show, please reach out. simplebaldman@hotmail.com. If you have a prayer request or need us to pray with you about something, same email. You can email us at accbernie@hotmail.com, or you can visit the website at accbernie.com, which is also another place you can find these videos if that's not where you're watching it now. Beyond that, catch us on Fridays. We do pop-up services out in public when we can, when the weather allows it. And, we're out here. If you see us on the street, stop us, talk to us, look for our logo, or just look for this, wonderfully non-threatening, non-scary face out there. But I am friendly. I don't bite. You can come talk to me. I would actually enjoy it and appreciate it. So I'm rambling, and I'm trying to keep this stuff simple. You guys have a great one. Can't wait till next week when we talk about our next subject. And until then, I'm praying for you. Reach out, talk to us. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.